Yo, what's going on, Serpa Squad? Tanner here, and I'm back with another Paludarium build. In this one I'll transform a standard 20-gallon long aquarium into a tall Skyscraper Paludarium with a waterfall. Let's get started. If you're anything like me, then you likely have a graveyard of old tanks that will probably never be set up again. I keep them around just in case I need them or for projects like this. Although this tank is old, it could be upcycled into something new, and that's exactly what I'll do. To do the job, I usually use a utility blade, a razor scraper, and a putty knife. I start by removing the silicone on the interior of the tank. Then I turn the tank upside down and cut through the trim. This usually takes a few passes, but afterward the trim can be removed with a putty knife and used for something else. I found that they repurpose well as shims for furniture. Anyway, I repeat the same process to the top trim. After that, the panes of glass can be separated. To do so, I start at the top of the tank with a razor scraper and slowly go down to cut through the seam. Sometimes it takes multiple passes to go all the way through. Once the seams on both ends of a pane are cut, the glass can be peeled back. The bottom seam is cut and the pane will lift away. I know that was a lot of tedious work, but I ended up with 5 perfectly good pieces of glass from materials I already had. These pieces still can't be used though. I went around and cleaned up all of the leftover silicone. I also sprayed down the glass and scrubbed them with Barkeeper's Friend using a microfiber cloth. This will remove any excess mineral buildup and gunk. They are of course sprayed down after that. With the panes cleaned up, I marked everything. I measured the pieces accordingly and clamped the straight edge to the table. I applied oil to the cutting tool and lightly rolled it along the glass to leave a line of grease. I didn't used to use oil, but it creates a much cleaner edge. Then I apply pressure and score the glass. From there I line the score up with the edge of the table and apply even downward pressure. I laid all of the newly cut pieces of glass on the table and did a dry fit. Everything fit together properly. I took it apart and gave the edges of glass light sanding so they weren't sharp. Afterward I rinsed away the debris. Once clean, I laid the pieces out and wiped areas that will be siliconed with rubbing alcohol to ensure the surface is clear of oil and debris. I also taped off the glass for cleaner beads of silicone. Per usual, I'll be using GE Silicone 1 to hold this together. I ran a bead along the appropriate spots and taped the pieces together. A bead of silicone was then ran along the inside of the tank. I cleaned this bead with my finger. Finally, the tape on the inside could be removed and the tank was left to sit for 24 hours while the silicone cured. The next day I removed the tape on the outside of the tank. I scraped away excess silicone to reveal the finalized tank. To keep the water flowing in this setup, I use a Kedsum submersible pump. I'll be using egg crate light diffuser held together by zip ties to make a cage for the pump. I put the pump in the tank and cut the egg crate down to size. I got 3 pieces and attached them together. This cage was siliconed onto the tank. I built another cage to go further up the back of the tank. This also is siliconed in place. To get this tank to work properly, I need to create shelves or overflow compartments. For that I'll use corrugated plastic. I measured and cut the plastic down to size. I scored it on one side to fold it over. After that I cut out the side pieces. A notch was made on the front as well. I marked the pieces at a few spots to drill holes. Zip ties were fed through these holes to keep everything together. Next I attached another section of egg crate to the top of the column in the tank. I then put the overflows in the appropriate spots. They fit properly, so I waterproofed the seams with silicone. I also stuck one of the shelves to the back of the tank with silicone. To scape this setup, I'll be using black lava rock of various sizes. Initially I wanted to use dragonstone, but I decided on lava rock because I have a ton of it. It's a good choice for a setup anyway, since it will wick water. I laid out the stones to get a good idea of how I wanted this scaped. Everything looked good, so I removed the stones and stuffed the egg crate with plastic bags. This will keep expanding foam out of all of the openings. With that taken care of, I put the stones back in the tank. To secure everything, I used Great Stuff Pond and Stone expanding foam. It was applied between all of the cracks and crevices. I let this cure for a few hours for stability. Then I foamed the remainder of the column and pressed stones into the wet foam. I let this cure for a few hours until I could turn the tank to an upright position. Now I'll conceal the overflow compartments. I covered the side and top of the removable one with stones using hot glue. I needed a quick solution that would allow me to easily get the stones attached, and hot glue was the best option. After that, I applied silicone to the lower compartment and pressed stones into it. At this point, I could remove the bags from the egg crate column. The pump was added to the setup, which is attached to a 1/2 inch PVC pipe. I placed the removable compartment over top of this pipe and marked for a hole. I used a diamond tipped hole saw to make the hole. The compartment was slid onto the pipe. I marked for the height of the pipe and cut it down shorter. A 45-degree elbow is placed over the pipe so that the water doesn't spray up into the air and out of the tank. Let's give it a test run. I filled up the tank with water and let it rip. It works perfectly. As you can see, the water overflows through the two compartments prior to making its way to the main water area. Now that we're sure everything works well, let's clean things up. To conceal the foam and imperfections, I used Cyanoacrylate superglue and pulverized lava rock. As you've seen me do in other videos, I simply applied some glue and pressed the rock dust into it. The end result is a seamless look that gives the illusion this is a single piece of stone. Once everything was concealed with this technique, I applied more foam to all of the open areas on the background. I let this cure for a few hours, and instead of covering it with stones, I carved it out with a razor scraper. These portions of the background will be covered in moisture wicking mesh for moss growth. I measured it out and cut it down slightly wider than the width of the tank. I applied a few dabs of glue along the top and put the mesh in place. I peeled it back and repeated the process. As I worked from left to right, I cut off excess. Another reason I'm using the mesh is because I can fold it into the overflow compartments. These will double as a water reservoir for the mesh. The same process was repeated in the bottom of the tank. I also concealed the edges of the mesh with glue, stones, and dust. To conceal the pump compartment, I use a combination of Metala Mat and Wicking mesh. I slid a piece of Metala Mat on the side. Then I covered another piece with mesh and concealed the egg crate. This will act as a growing surface for the moss while also capturing fine debris. Now we can finish scaping the setup with dragon root. I turned the tank on its side and experimented with various layouts. I decided that it looked best with roots coming from a single point and branching out from there. I felt this was the best way to showcase both hardscape materials. I then glued everything in place. Once I was able to get the tank to an upright position, I added smaller roots for more detail and texture. These two were glued in place and concealed with dust. To plant the background, I'll primarily use flame moss. I started by applying a few dabs of glue to the mesh and pressed moss on top of it. I did this to completely hide the pump area. Afterward, I sprayed the moss to keep it from drying out. I repeated the same process on the left side of the tank. From there, I went to the top of the background and put a long strand of mesh into a crevice. This goes back into an overflow tray to wick water for the moss it's covered in. From there, I filled the overflow with Metala Mat for biological filtration. There are already a ton of surfaces, but it never hurts to have more. I put a strip of mesh in the compartment and over one of the larger stones. This will make it easier to keep the moss hydrated. I concealed the rest of the compartment with stones and added the moss atop the fabric. Then I proceeded to put moss in other nooks and crannies. I sprayed everything down before the remaining steps. For the water area, I'll be using some Anubias Petite. I simply wedged off the rhizomes between the roots. I sprayed them down as well. I want the top of the setup to have an interesting look and a lot of texture. What better than a few rabbit's foot ferns? I think these will really do well in the setup and look perfect. What I did was situate them on the background and use stainless steel wire to hold them in place. I added some damp sphagnum moss to protect the roots. I repeated the process for the second fern. I wanted to include a few air plants, which consists of 3 Tillandsia ionantha. I also added a few vines of Fungus Pumila quercifolia for additional texture. Let's move on to the aquatic portion of this setup. I'll be using a combination of Fluval Stratum and Seachem Flourite Dark. I poured a thin layer into the tank and distributed it with my brush. Then I capped everything off with black sand. I also worked in a few lava rocks throughout the scape. From there, I added a scoop of Fritz A.C.C.R water conditioner, which was provided by our channel sponsor, and filled up the tank. Once full, I added a few plants including Rotala indica and Cryptocorn Wenti bronze. However, I later decided that I didn't like the look of any of this and felt they detracted from the scape, so I removed them. Instead of filling the space with more plants, I decided to go with more hardscape. I also added a few more Anubias and patches of moss throughout to complete the setup. And there you have it, the Skyscraper Waterfall Paludarium. I'm a fan of just about any project that includes moss and a waterfall. This one is no exception. I think the tank turned out really well and was a great use of an older aquarium. I also really like the layout of everything. My initial idea was to have the water area heavily planted, but after experimenting with a few things, I think this one is better to stay simple. With all of the detail work I put into the hardscape, it just didn't make sense to have a ton of plants. That said, I can't wait to see how everything looks as the moss matures. For those of you wondering, I am going to stock this tank, but I'll save that for another video. The planned inhabitants are currently going through quarantine. I'm open to suggestions though, because I could put what I got in a different setup instead of this one. Just for reference, the water area measures 12 by 12 by 12 inches. Anyway, what do you think of the final product? Let me know down in the comments. That's all for this one though. Until next time, Serpa Squad, take care and peace.